Welcome to the 1 Minute Preceptor Podcast, your resource for clinical rotation advice and tips to prepare for your externships in healthcare. Learn how to earn letters of recommendation, prepare for your clerkship, and excel at patient care from preceptors with years of practice. We interview physician educators in every specialty and clinical setting to discuss how to prepare for your rotation and improve your clinical experience. Here's your host and med-ed entrepreneur, DiMarco.
Today, we are joined by PhD candidate at the Center of Innovation for Medical Education, Renée Hendriks. She has done research in MOOCs specifically for medical education, which is something I find very fascinating. And that's one of the topics we're going to cover more today. So, Renée, what is the coolest thing that you've seen in the academic medical setting?
So we have a yearly debate in our Leiden University Medical Center where students get to discuss with their teachers what they like and don't like about their medical education. And what I find really cool is that students want to learn more and more about what education really is. So they know they are going to be teachers themselves as a medical professional, and they're really interested in getting to know more about education and being a teacher. So I find that really cool to see that everyone's getting more interested in education.
That's really interesting. Yeah, learning why we're all here. What is the goal of our learning? Are we trying to learn to memorize this? Are we trying to learn how to implement that? Is it a little bit of both? And if most of us are going to be physicians and in some way related to teaching other physicians, teaching medical students and residents, it makes sense that we should have a little bit of background knowledge on teaching pedagogy.
Yeah, right.
So can you go into a little bit more about yourself? What brought you into this line of education and research, for instance?
Well, I was always interested in explaining really difficult concepts to people who didn't get them straight away. And so I just decided to read more about that. And then I got hooked when I read about self-regulated learning and people wanting to help themselves understand stuff. So that's, how I got into researching education. And the online part is because this is going to happen. It's already happening. And right now with Corona, everybody is learning online. And this is only going to be more important in the future. And I think it's really difficult still to decide how to learn online in an effective way. And so that's what I set out to find out, really.
That is perfect. And this time frame is a great time to be doing this interview because, like you said, everyone's currently practicing at home. Schools have been canceled in a lot of countries.
Yes.
And something that I know I've advocated for in the past is switching over to more of a online-based education system. And there's a lot of pushback for that. Are still a lot of people, despite I'm not sure if there's any evidence to back up their feelings on this, but they really think that a brick and mortar school is the only way to teach medicine. And I don't know that that's exactly what the evidence is showing us so far.
Now, well, what we do know is that online education can be as good and it can also be better than face-to-face education, but it can also be worse. So it really depends on how you shape your online education and the way you design it. It's difficult to compare, and that's why we always say compare two kinds of education and not something compared to nothing. So not intervention compared with the usual education or something. Always compare two things that are both innovations.
It sounds similar to maybe a non-inferiority trial for a drug trial. You want to prove not only that there's an effect, but that it's equal to or better than whatever's currently out there.
Right.
And it seems like in that situation, it's going to depend just as much on the instructor, their familiarity with the technology, what technologies they're using, maybe even a lot of individual differences with the students, because some students just really don't like the online format or don't feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think when designing online learning, we always try to have expertise in different areas. So you want the technical expertise, obviously. You want expertise on the topic you're covering, and you also want didactical expertise. So that's really important from the side of online education design to cover all those basics, if you will. And for students, I think it's also becoming more familiar with ways of learning online, and especially knowing how to learn. And that's what I'm really interested in, is how to self-regulate and motivate yourself when learning online. So this is a skill set that I think some students lack, and they can master those skills. So
great. And I think that's something that I should probably focus on a little more with the Medical Nemesis podcast, my other show. We cover a lot of learning how to learn, but don't really focus on like the terminology self-directed learning, self-regulated learning as much, and how to get into that stage if you're not really there already, if you haven't had experience in that. It'd be an interesting topic in the future.
Yeah, certainly.
So far with your experiences with MOOCs and medical education, are there certain areas where you found it maybe to have a stronger effect or a lesser effect, or what is the research kind of showing us so far?
Well, what I've done is I've looked at specifically medical MOOCs, where I try to uncover what they really offer. So what kind of teaching modes, what kind of instruction is in there, what kind of collaboration is in there, what kind of assessment is in there, and also what's the quality of these courses, because that's something that's really important for students to know, but also for teachers that want to reuse these courses. So that's what I wanted to figure out, and I've looked at 33 of these medical MOOCs. And what I found is that especially medical MOOCs, one of the main findings is that medical MOOCs offer also teaching modes that help you construct knowledge. So that's important for more difficult concepts, that you try to make a concept of something in your own mind of how a specific concept works. And from the literature, we know that this kind of constructive learning is not always in MOOCs. Usually it's only copying information from what someone says in a lecture and just saying, okay, I've seen this lecture and now I know this. And the medical MOOCs do offer the other form of learning, which is really good, in my opinion.
Okay, so for someone that's taken dozens of these courses, and MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Course, I've taken a lot of courses on Coursera, edX. I think ClassCentral.com, I believe, has now a searchable repository of all online MOOCs available to students. And these are free materials for the most part that anyone can take. And due to them being free, they often are very passive learning, like you were discussing.
Right.
There are lectures that you watch, and a lot of times students such as myself might not take notes, might not do the quizzes, might not actively participate in the learning. So it's not going to be as strong of learning. So it seems even from not just the pedagogy of setting up these and teaching these courses, but how to monitor students' efficacy and their level of self-regulated learning would make it very difficult to do any research in this category.
Yeah, you're completely right. This is the design that's almost been copied from face-to-face education to online education, where you just send information and you trust a student to receive the information, where you don't really know if they do receive it. And for making sure they receive it, you have to activate them and also motivate them, because like you said, some students find it really difficult to stay focused.
I wonder if there are certain courses that are more likely to be easily replaced by these. For instance, I have constantly received pushback in the past when advocating for these types of courses that anatomy, for instance, could never be replaced because, yes, you can do the lecture part of anatomy, but the lab part would be difficult. But now there are so many digital cadaver technologies out there that I struggle to see that it would negate the option anyway, if nothing else. And if there are maybe certain areas that are more prone to be successful using this type of technology than others.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. And certainly preparing for face-to-face meetings is really doable online. And like you said, anatomy courses, they are certainly really doable. At least getting familiar with physical parts of the body, that's really also speeding up right now. A colleague of mine is doing research on 3D it's virtual reality, and they test if students that don't have the ability to rotate an image in their head if they are helped by visuals that rotate. So for these students, it's really good to see a cadaver in real life, because they can make a 3D image. But also, of course, we can now make rotating images online. So these things are really useful. And to some extent, we can replace face-to-face education by online education, for sure.
Wow. So that comes back to just maybe certain students' innate ability is for 3D spatial awareness of something, where it's very difficult through a textbook, a two-dimensional representation, or even an instructor drawing it or using a PowerPoint presentation, which is why a lot of people have advocated for the lab being necessary. But now we have technologies to replace that as well.
Yeah. Some innovation that is possible online is really even better online than face-to-face. For example, another thing that's really up and coming right now is personalization of courses. So most online courses, they produce massive amounts of information about the learner. And we're not really that advanced in analyzing this data, but we are getting there at some point. And from that moment on, we can personalize course content to needs of students. And this is a specific form of differentiation in education that we have not seen before, because this is just not possible on the face-to-face level. So some things are even better online than face-to-face.
I couldn't agree more. And it gives you time to pause, take a break when you need to as an individual learner, and come back to the material or go over the material a second time, rewind, rewatch a video if need be. So that just provides a lot of benefit, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're completely right. Although you can't really take away all the face-to-face contact, because it's important for some technical skills, but also conversational skills, surgical skills, physical examination. And also, it's really important to feel related to peers and teachers in your learning environment. And there is research being done on how this works online. But we know it's really good to also see each other in person sometimes. That helps for staying motivated somehow. So let's not discard face-to-face education completely.
All right. Yeah, I always assumed that in some sort of academic online education arena, it would open up the instructor to much more individualized tutoring time, personalized time with the student, because they're not redoing the same lecture all the time, wasting their time every semester. As opposed to that, they can do it one time potentially, keep reusing the same videos, now utilize their time to actually tackle student problems, and also have students joining in groups online to enter into some of that peer communication and social development that's required.
Yeah, I think you're right, but this is basically the flipped classroom principle, where you prepare what you can prepare beforehand and then dive deeper into materials when you meet. And the meeting can obviously also take place online, but for certain workshops, it's really good to also see each other face to face. But you're right, if we can manage to optimize use of video lectures and make use of the teacher's time to process materials further, then that's much better. Although also for lectures, it's good to know that sometimes seeing someone speak really passionately about their vocation, it's also motivating. And that's also really important, that students see someone they can look up to. So this can also happen online, but the magic of the role model is also really transferred when you see someone in the real.
So from a student's point of view, if they were to take some of these courses online, one of the key takeaways would probably be to be an active learner. Don't just watch the videos, maybe take some notes, communicate with other students in the class, reach out to the instructor, test yourself, not just the in-class quizzes, but test yourself on the material. Add complicated materials to your flashcard deck or your notes or whatever you're using. And maybe from an instructor point of view, someone that wants to get into this, do we have any specific information on maybe the impact of different course designs in these types of online environments?
Yes, we do. There's a set of principles that have been compiled to really dictate quality of instructional design, if you will. And when I looked at the 33 medical MOOCs, I've also done the investigation into the quality of these MOOCs using these principles. So, for example, one of these principles is activation, where you give students prompts to take notes or summarize or, like whatever. So, but you also have other principles like integration, where you ask students to integrate what they have learned into their daily activities. So, for example, if you have learned online the proper way of giving feedback, for example, a way of integration would be to try and give feedback to someone at home or in school, or just try to use what you have learned in your everyday life. So there's a set of principles, and these are fairly well known. So in one of my papers, I list them all. There are 11 of them, and there's a lot known about instructional design and activating students and how that can be done.
Awesome. We'll definitely have to put that in the show notes too, so anyone listening to this can refer to that. I'd like to see what the 11 principles are myself. I know that I made an online course in 2018, and the course has been taken down. The videos are still freely available on our YouTube channel for Free Med Ed, but I am curious to see how many of those I might have added to mine or which ones I missed, and I should look at that before I make a future course for sure.
Yeah, it's really most, or I think half of the principles feel really natural to implement, and about the other half, you have to think a bit longer or more about how to do it, but they're all really doable, and they really help to make a course better and have students really use what they learn afterwards.
So that brings up an interesting point. From a student's point of view, they can utilize these free MOOCs or even for pay MOOCs online. What would be a good way to recommend using these properly right now, since it's not for most schools a natural part of their curriculum? Could they use this to supplement their own education? Should they just focus on it for outside education? Are there any ways to keep track of where they're at and where they're going with these sort of disparate resources all over the place?
I haven't done any research into what would be best, but from a personal point of view, I would say use it to see what interests you and make yourself a more interesting person to yourself. So I see it as finding what you like, really. And of course, it's also good to show on your to future employers what you've covered, but that's more of an external regulation for doing something, whereas I prefer to do something because you're interested in it, and just broadening your horizon or specializing in what you like, because we have to make choices in what we want to do quite young in this day and age. And I think sometimes we're a bit early in discarding other options. And it's never too late to say, I'm interested in this also, and I'm going to look into it just for me. And so that's what I would say.
Were any of the 33 medical MOOCs that you looked at related to clinical medicine, related to being in the hospital under a preceptor, sort of the patient care aspect or a physical diagnosis, those types of clinical skills?
Certainly. I've seen MOOCs that were on clinical kidney transplantation. I've seen also eye surgery. I've also seen communicating with patients, which was one I really liked, about cancer, about the common cold. It's just, quite a big variety, actually.
Awesome. I'm curious to see if maybe in the future, certain physicians that currently have medical students and residents might start using these types of course development technologies to educate their students when they might be very busy on the wards and can't have equal access to all the patients, or other things get in the way, or they just don't have the time. They can supplement the clinical experience a little bit, or prepare them anyway for the clinical experience by some sort of online technology and course?
Yeah, so this is really one of the focuses of my research, that it's really beautiful what medical teachers have made as MOOCs. The materials are really appealing. The videos are high quality. They're really beautiful pictures, and the questions are really good. Most MOOCs are made by universities that want to show the world how good they are in a certain topic. So they really work hard on these MOOCs, and you can see that. So they're really beautiful resources. And the reason that we have looked into how to use these MOOCs in the formal medical education context. And we've also written an article about this that is about how to implement medical MOOCs in the campus context. And we give some pointers on what to consider beforehand, and also the practical steps that you have to take to use these resources. Because other than that they might save the teacher some time, it's also an opportunity to offer information about topics that other universities have expertise. Of course, there are all the advantages of learning online, but there's also the opportunity to talk to medical students and teachers from all over the world. So, for instance, there was a MOOC about organ transplantation. And what I saw on the forum there was that organ donation after death is something that is not accepted in all countries. And this is something that's not in all curricula over the world, because you learn what's most important for your country. But this is really interesting because you get to talk and find solutions together that you don't really have in your own institution if you only talk to peers from your own country. So it's really multi-dimensional what it offers.
Interesting. So you get a different medical, legal, and ethical viewpoint from a multitude of resources, and really understanding why their system is set up that way and why yours is set up the way it is, which we probably would have to memorize that we have to do it this way, but not really always comprehend why without that comparison. Yeah, and that's really important, because if you try to memorize just for sake of memorizing, it's bound to get lost somewhere in your brain. And when you understand why and you're triggered, then you're far more, you'll remember. So that's really good about MOOCs. I like that. Quick question for the instructors here is the feedback that they give going to be as effective as something in person? Do we see any differences with, for instance, if you get a test back in person and it has a big red F on it, that's going to have a potential psychological impact on the students, whereas maybe grading or feedback in a digital medium is different? Yeah, so grading and giving feedback in MOOCs is what I have found mostly automated, or it's by peers. And one of the principles that I've just mentioned is expert feedback. So what you really want to progress in your education is an expert who says what you can change and try to make yourself better. And in MOOCs, this is really difficult because you have massive amounts of students. So the teacher cannot give everyone this kind of qualitative feedback, if you will. So that's where the automated quizzes come in, and where peer feedback comes in. And these are helpful to improve. But for now, we don't really have the expert feedback by the teacher yet. And as students can certainly use the automated quizzes to master the subject to an extent. And they also can ask peers they trust in what they can improve. But for now, one of the difficulties in MOOCs is offering expert feedback. There's research ongoing, not at our institution, but around the world, in how to upscale expert feedback. So we're working on it. Good to see. All right. Yeah, that's one topic that I've always heard of, is maybe also through MOOCs, since you're reaching a wider population, that you would need less instructors overall, but the quality of the instructors would probably be higher. But I think I could probably talk about this for another 3 hours with you, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So maybe we should schedule to have another call in the future sometime and see where can the audience or what are some last minute feedback and thoughts for not only students that might be using these resources, but also for instructors that might want to get into trying out these new technologies or existing technologies.
So I'll start with the teachers. I really recommend they read our article because it's really practical information that we've compiled. So the article is in Medical Teacher, and it's called 12 Tips for Integrating Massive Open Online Courses Content into Classroom Teaching. And my tip is to read that article and get started. Just try it. And for students, I would say participate actively, but also regulate your own learning. And this entails that you set goals for what you want to master and in what time frame, and that you also monitor if you reach your goals. So try to check with yourself if you understand what you're learning, if you really do have enough time to learn in the MOOC or what you want to learn in the MOOC. And also ask for help. If you get stuck, ask for help. You can do this on the forums, but also just if you have something that you don't understand, ask a peer in your class or ask your teacher from your own university to help you out. And that's really important to move on from your problem. So that's what I would say, in addition to checking yourself, which is really important to check if you understand everything.
Setting goals, self-monitoring, and mentorship are always things that we like to bring up in the Medical Nimbleness podcast as well. Very important topics. And what is the biggest change that you would hope to see in academic medicine in the next couple of years?
What I really hope is that we focus on self-regulation skills as important skills even before basic medical knowledge. And that sounds really weird, but especially medicine is really a vocation where information changes, and medical specialists have to keep learning. They have to be lifelong learners. And for this to happen, people have to know how to regulate their learning. And like I said, medical students will be the medical teachers for the next generation. So it's really important to know something about education for medical students. And also this also entails if you know how to design education, then you also understand how to make your own learning fruitful. So that is my wish and my goal, really. So
that is a great goal. I love it. Well, Renée Hendriks, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.